I'm Talia from Little House on Laurel. Today I am making sourdough Pop-Tarts, which I think you'll love. If you do buy Pop-Tarts from the store, I can guarantee you're not going to want to buy them anymore after you try these sourdough Pop-Tarts. They are over the top amazing. I'm usually pretty good about having sugar in moderation, but when I make a batch of these Pop-Tarts, I have to say I can eat a couple of them in one sitting. So make sure that when you make these, you're making them with people around that you can share with, because you don't want to eat all 8 of them yourself. These are definitely not the same as store-bought because they're not crunchy and really thin, and they definitely won't fit in your toaster. But these are soft. They use a pastry crust, and they have just enough thickness that you can sink your teeth into it, which I haven't had any complaints from my husband or my boys. So they're pretty much a winner, and they probably will be in your home too. What I especially love about these sourdough Pop-Tarts is the contrast between the tart sourdough of the crust and then the sweetness of the filling. Now for these, I'm making some of them with homemade raspberry jam, and then I'm also making some with Nutella. And you can basically use any kind of jam or filling that you want, but that's what I'm using for these, and it's turned out really well. One thing I would recommend for this recipe is to use a food processor to mix up your dough. Because first of all, it's always kind of difficult when you're working with cold butter with a pastry crust to get it mixed in with the flour, but it can be done with the normal pastry cutter. The real reason that I prefer a food processor is because you want this dough to be pretty thick, almost the consistency of Play-Doh, where you can really manage it well with your hands. And for it to be that thick, it becomes a little bit difficult to mix by hand. I'm sure it's possible with a lot of elbow grease, but if you have a food processor, then you'll want to use that. It will save you a lot of time and a lot of effort. Another tool you will need is a rolling pin. The great thing about these Pop-Tarts is that you can use any sourdough starter. It can be active and bubbly, or it can be just discard. I do like to let this sit overnight or for at least 8 hours so that your crust will have the benefits of being fermented. You can just use the sourdough discard and then mix up your dough, and instead of letting it ferment for 8 or more hours, just put it in the fridge in a ball for a few hours to chill, and then go ahead and proceed with making the recipe. You just won't get the benefits of having fermented sourdough for your whole crust. So usually I start the night before to make this recipe so that it can ferment overnight. However, today, because I wanted some good lighting for this, I'm making it around noon, and I'm going to let it ferment until about 8 or 9 o'clock tonight. And then I'll put it in a ball and chill it in the fridge overnight. And in the morning, we'll proceed to the next steps. So let's get started making our crust. We'll start by putting in 3 cups of flour, and 1 teaspoon salt. And I have the dough hook in my food processor because when you get to the point where you're mixing up the butter, if you have the metal blades, it's just not quite strong enough to handle the strain of the thickness of the dough. And so you definitely want the dough hook. All right, I'm going to give this a little mix, just the flour and the salt. Now I'm going to add the 1 1/4 cups cubed butter to the food processor. just going to push the flour down on the sides a little bit. This is looking great. So you'll be able to, you can see right here that this is now in crumbs. So the flour has all been incorporated into the butter. Now I'm going to add a tablespoon of honey. I'm going to add a cup of sourdough starter. And this can be, like I said before, either active and bubbly or just a discard. I'm going to put the lid on and let this dough mix up until everything is incorporated, and it's going to be thick. All right, this is very well mixed. And like you can see, I can handle this really well with my hands. It's not sticky, but it feels like Play-Doh. It's nice and smooth. The next step is to oil a bowl, and then we're going to place the dough, which you'll want to form into a ball. And we'll put it into a greased bowl. I like to flip it so it's a little bit greased on both sides. And then I'm going to cover that with saran wrap since it'll be sitting out for at least 8 hours. I don't want it to start to dry out on top. So I'll put saran wrap on there and then a towel, and I'll let it sit for at least 8 hours. Last night, after I let the pastry dough sit and ferment on the counter for about 8 or 9 hours, I did take it out of the bowl and I wrapped it directly in saran wrap before I placed it in the refrigerator. This way it doesn't dry out in the fridge, and you can keep it in the fridge for up to 3 days if you are not ready yet to use it. So I'm going to take it out of the saran wrap. It is still pretty firm, and you do want it to be firm. That's why you chill it, is so that it's easier to roll out and cut. But if it's too firm, then it's going to be really hard to work too. So we're going to see how this goes. So I'm going to flour the surface. And I'm going to flour my rolling pin as well. This is so hard. All right, so I'm going to give this about 15 minutes and come back, and it should be softer and more workable by then. It might take some elbow grease. We're trying to roll it out into a rectangle about 1/8 inch thick. If it starts to stick to your rolling pin, just add more flour. And what we're going to end up doing is, once we have this in a big rectangle, we're going to cut it in half, and then we'll cut each half into 4 long strips. And as much as we can, we're trying to just keep it in a rectangle. It is, doing some cracking, and we'll be able to patch those up before we move on. When those cracks start, it seems to be because it's sticking to my rolling pin. So now it's time to flour your rolling pin again. Just want to smooth everything out so that it is all about the same thickness all the way around. Okay, so it's not perfect, but we're gonna make it look good. All right, so I'm just using a pizza cutter. You can use a sharp knife, and we're just gonna trim the edges so it's not as jagged. And we'll save this leftover dough to patch areas. I want it to look nice, but I'm not about perfection. This does not have to be perfectly beautiful. All right, so like I said, we're going to now cut this in half. And then each half we're going to make 4 long strips. And for the fun part, we get to put the filling in. I have raspberry jam that I homemade from raspberries in our garden. And so since I have plenty of that on hand, I'm gonna use raspberry jam for half of them. And then I'm also gonna use Nutella for the other half. You want about a tablespoon. You wanna put it on one edge, but leaving some space. You're going to fold the strip over, and then we will close the edges with a fork. So about a tablespoon, tablespoon and a half. You don't want too much or it will be difficult to close and it will squeeze, the jam will squeeze out of the sides, which will be really messy. But you want enough in there so that you have a good amount of filling and not too much dough. I know Nutella is not the healthiest choice. I will link on my blog post to a recipe I found for homemade Nutella, which you can make a lot with a lot healthier ingredients, and you can control the amount of sugar too. And then of course you can use any kind of jam. It doesn't have to be raspberry, whatever you have on hand. And if you do have kind of a lot, if it's getting too close to the edges, if you can try to smooth it out the long ways so there's less around the edge. You're gonna take this one side and fold it over. And then using a fork, you'll press down to close it. And you don't have to, but you can press down on the edge that has the fold, just so it looks uniform. All right, and place that on the baking sheet. You'll just close each Pop-Tart. I still happen to get jam squeezing out. I'm going to crack an egg and make an egg wash just by whisking it for a little bit. And then brushing it onto the tops of the Pop-Tarts with a pastry brush. Putting the egg wash on top will help the Pop-Tart to develop a better brown color, and it'll also help it have a little bit of a sheen to it, which looks really professional. They're ready to put in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 25 minutes. And you're just looking for that nice brown color on top. If you don't cook them long enough, they'll be a little bit doughy on the inside, and we don't want that. And just removed the Pop-Tarts from the oven, and you'll see this beautiful brown color on top, and it's a little bit shiny. I'm going to put these on a baker's rack to cool. And you want these to cool completely before you add the icing. If you add the icing while they're warm, it will make the icing runnier and it won't set as well on top. While these are cooling, I'm going to make the icing. I'm going to place this on top of a pan with parchment paper, so when I do the icing, it won't be so messy to clean up. The icing is really simple. You want 3/4 cup of powdered sugar and 2 to 3 teaspoons of milk. All right, it's time to pour the icing on top. You can do a little bit of spreading out with the spoon. Right, and the last thing is if you want to add any sprinkles or sugar crystals. And you need to do this pretty quickly before your icing starts to glaze over. This is already starting to harden. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned how to make sourdough Pop-Tarts. If you make these and enjoy them, I hope you'll comment below and let me know. I will have the link to my free kefir smoothie ebook and links to other sourdough videos on my YouTube channel. I hope to see you soon.